It is the Resistance Report for March 28th, 2017. Today, the theme that we're going to use is contempt for the public, contempt for public opinion. And you see it in several stories today. I want to weave them together, give you some context, and also the underlying reality. First story has to do with the Trump administration and what it has done to try to block former Attorney General Sally Yates from testifying to Congress at this week's hearing of the House investigation of alleged links between Russian officials and Trump's presidential campaign. Now, after Yates' lawyer told the White House that she still wants to testify, the White House doesn't have any power over Yates. Yates was fired, you remember, by Trump. Yates still wants to testify, but after Yates' lawyer said to the White House that Yates still wanted to testify, what happened? Well, the hearing was abruptly canceled by panel chairman Devin Nunes. Here's another example of how Nunes is playing the game. He's doing exactly what the Trump White House wants him to do. Yates and another witness at the planned hearing, former CIA Director John Brennan, had made clear that their testimony was probably going to contradict testimony and statements that had been provided by White House officials to the committee. Well, so you can understand, knowing that, there was a very, very strong predisposition on the part of Nunes to cancel the hearings. Also, once it became clear that the White House could not pressure Yates or presumably Brennan not to testify, then those hearings become just gone. They are gone. There are no hearings. Now, as acting Attorney General, you remember, Yates played a key part in the investigation surrounding Trump campaign aide and then National Security Advisor Michael Flynn about revelations that he had discussed sanctions with the Russian ambassador to the United States in late December. And his misstatements, let's put it nicely, Flynn's lies about that, to be brutally truthful, led to his ouster. The fact of the matter is that Nunes cannot be trusted with this investigation. We knew this already. This is just more evidence piling on. The White House can't be trusted to allow the investigation to occur. The Justice Department can't be trusted to allow the FBI to do its job. And it's not at all clear that James Comey, head of the FBI, can be trusted to do the job, which is why we need a select committee, a special prosecutor, probably also an independent commission. You have to understand what Trump and also Nunes and his other enablers are trying to do here. It's not just cover up what has happened with possible communications between the Trump campaign and Russian operatives. The circumstantial evidence keeps mounting every day. It's not just covering that up. It's also confusing the public, deflecting the public's attention. The whole story that Trump came up with about how Barack Obama was wiretapping him, and then there was some surveillance. He changed the story slightly, Trump did. Well, all of that creates, and then Nunes going to the White House grounds last week and finding somebody there who had some evidence that, in fact, there was some surveillance that inadvertently might have included Trump. All of that is just a smokescreen. It is designed to confuse the public, to deflect attention from the underlying issue and the underlying question, which is simply this: did Trump and or his campaign aides have any collusion or relationship, communication? Did they encourage Russian operatives to interfere in the 2016 campaign on behalf of Trump. We know it has been established that Russian operatives did, in fact, interfere in the campaign on behalf of Trump. There's no question about that. The question that remains is very specific. That is, did Trump and or his aides know about this or in any way collude with Russian operatives about this? This is what Trump wants to muddy. This is why all of the effort to create a story about Barack Obama wiretapping Trump, or Nunes having witnesses that will do this, or not having witnesses, and all of the rigmarole, all of this separate story is designed to confuse the public. So basically the public doesn't know who's telling the truth, and the public gets to the point where a big segment of the public says, look, I'm confused. I don't even care anymore. Somebody's lying. It's probably both sides. It's just another partisan effort. Partisanship. That's what Trump wants. Confusion, and to make all this look like business as usual partisanship in Washington, so that Donald Trump is in a position of saying, don't pay attention. That's what he's wanted all along. And that's what we, you and I, and everyone else who cares about this country has got to make sure doesn't happen. There can't be a whitewash at the White House. There cannot be a distraction from what is the essential issue here. This was an attack on our democracy like never before, and if Trump had anything to do with it, and or his aides had anything to do with it, this is treason. This is a colossal, colossal issue. Now they may succeed, Trump may succeed at creating this kind of confusion and sense of cynicism in the public's mind, unless there are Republican statesmen. Now let me emphasize this, because if there are Republican statesmen who have a shred of integrity and concern about the integrity of our democratic process, those Republicans can do a lot of good right now, can dispel the illusion that this is just another partisan effort, or, as Trump has described it, a witch hunt. John McCain has come a long way. Hasn't gone as far as he should, but today he said, I've been around for quite a while, I've never heard of any such thing. He was referring to Nunes, and Nunes's decision basically to block former Attorney General, Acting Attorney General Sally Yates. He said, I've been around for quite a while, I've never heard of any such thing. This is a very serious issue, he said. It all started, now this is important, it all started, said John McCain, with Russian interference, attempt to change the outcome of our election. And so it's turning into a centipede, like these things have a tendency of doing, and another shoe seems to drop every few days. Now, John McCain has not come right out and said there is credible evidence that Trump and his cronies or aides have colluded. But you know, there has to be credible evidence of that, or the FBI would not have commenced its investigation. The test of whether the FBI investigates is whether there is credible evidence. John McCain needs to step up. He also has said, but he's got to say more forcefully, and it's not just John McCain. He and other Republicans have got to say there must be a special prosecutor, a bipartisan select committee to look into this, and a commission. We've got to get to the bottom of this. The longer this hangs over the Trump administration and over Republicans and Democrats, over our system of government, the worse this is. The deeper the public cynicism, potentially the deeper the public distrust. Now here's another example, reported, of contempt for public opinion by the Trump administration. I've mentioned before this billionaire investor named Carl Icahn. Well, he was brought on in December by Donald Trump as Trump's special advisor on regulatory matters. It turns out, according to the New York Times, ICANN has been very busy behind the scenes in his capacity as Trump advisor to try to revamp an obscure Environmental Protection Agency rule that governs the way corn-based ethanol is mixed in with gasoline nationwide. Now, why is ICANN so obsessed about this particular regulation? Remember, he's the advisor now on regulatory reform. He's focusing on this one regulation. And according to the New York Times, he's been devoting a lot of time to this, behind the scenes, talking with key players, trying to get this change. Why? Because he owns 82% of a company called CVR Energy. That's an oil refiner based in Sugar Land, Texas. This oil refiner, it turns out, would have saved over $200 million last year alone had the regulatory fix that ICANN is now getting, or trying to get, been put into place. Now, in anticipation, after December, in anticipation of ICANN getting this fix, saving all of this money, making higher profits, CVR's stock price, CVR Energy's stock price is up 50% from its price before the election. That means that Carl Icahn has generated, just on the basis of insider status, $455 million, freeze on all new regulations. Trump has allowed one Internal Revenue Service rule to go into effect that expands a special kind of loophole for the oil and gas business. It's a tax loophole called a Master Limited Partnership. ICANN cited this particular loophole several years ago as the primary reason he first made his big investment in CVR Energy in 2012. So he's getting a bigger loophole created for himself as advisor on regulatory matters. How can he get away with this? Well, I'll tell you how he officially gets away with it. He says that he is not bound by the conflict of interest rules and the ethics laws because he's not a government employee. He says that he's not bound by these rules because he's an informal advisor to Donald Trump. Even though Donald Trump named him as special advisor on regulatory matters, he says he's an informal. He's not actually taking a salary, and therefore he's not bound by these ethics rules. Does that sound familiar to you? If it does, it should, because that's exactly what Ivanka Trump said when she not only became a special advisor to her father, also with an office in the White House, also with access to classified information. She says, oh no, I'm not bound by ethics rules either, or conflicts of interest rules, because I'm not officially a government employee. I'm not taking a salary. How many people will there be around Donald Trump advising on all sorts of matters in which they have a financial interest, in which they are essentially looting the government, costing you and me a lot of money? They're not doing the public interest, they are doing their own interest or their family's interest. How many people will there be who can skirt the ethics laws, the conflict of interest laws, because they say, oh, formally, I am not a government employee. Formally, I don't have to be bound by the ethics laws. You see the contempt for public opinion here? You see the cynicism? One other example. Attorney General Jeff Sessions. He announces that if state and local governments want to continue to receive billions of dollars from the Justice Department, for grants from the Justice Department gives out a lot of grants, and they're for all sorts of things, such as, for example, support for victims of last year's mass shooting at that gay nightclub in Orlando. If states want, and if localities want to get these special grants from the Justice Department, then they must certify that they are not sanctuary cities or states. In other words, they have to commit themselves to helping the immigration enforcement authorities find and deport unauthorized immigrants. Justify this? He says sanctuary cities and states are, quote, more at risk for violence and crime, unquote. Folks, not only no logical sense, but it is wrong. It is absolutely empirically wrong for a whole bunch of reasons. First of all, turning state and local police into agents of the immigration authorities takes their time and attention away from fighting crime and violence. They're going after people who simply are here, are not authorized to be here, and that means they are not doing their jobs in terms of criminal law enforcement. That increases crime and violence. You have a limited amount of time and energy and enforcement authority, local police and state police. And number two, you know this, unauthorized immigrants, undocumented immigrants commit proportionally less crime and violence than do people who are native born, as a proportion of total violence in our society. And so even on that grounds, it makes no sense for local law enforcement to go after these unauthorized immigrants and turn themselves into agents of the immigration enforcement rather than spending their time on what they ought to be spending their time doing. And finally, it makes no sense because the more fearful, unauthorized, undocumented immigrants are to go to the police when they know about crime or violence in their community, the more nervous they are, the more unwilling they are to go to the police, then everybody's less safe. Not only are they less safe, but the entire community is less safe. So Jeff Sessions has this completely wrong. He is, again, in doing this, he is showing, just like Donald Trump and just like Carl Icahn and just like what we have seen from Devin Nunes, is showing a contempt for the public, for public opinion, for the way honest, rational government ought to be working. I could go on, but you get my point. There are things that you can do, and I will get to that in a minute. I want to take your questions, though. Number one, Bill Runeberg. And Bill, you say, I fear we may get lost in the woods with everything horrible that's coming out. How can we get to the big issues, like getting big money out of politics and eliminating the Electoral College? Well, Bill, there's not too much we can do right now. With Democrats in the minority, and even if they were in the majority, they would need to be pushed to get big money out of politics because they're taking big money just like Republicans have been taking big money. But in terms of the Electoral College, there is something you can do at the state level. There's something called the nationalpopularvote.com. I'm going to repeat that, nationalpopularvote.com. And what you can do, and what many states have already done, is pass laws that say if a particular candidate gets a majority in that state in a presidential election, all of the electors in that state will go to that particular candidate. And if you get 270 electors, states that have a total of 270 electors, and we're getting there step by step, your state can join in. I urge your state to join in. Then that's it. You don't have to abolish the Electoral College because the Electoral College becomes irrelevant. You've got enough states that are pledging that all of their electors will go to the winner of the popular vote. That's it. It's done. Julia Odell, who decides when the House Select Committee is totally ineffective, and how long do they get to get their act together? Who decides to start an independent investigation? Julia, it is up to ultimately you and me, but it is right now up to the Republicans. They have a majority in the House and also in the Senate. They will not start an independent investigation in terms of a select committee or a bipartisan commission or an independent commission or an independent special prosecutor. They won't do any of this until they feel public opinion pushing them to do this. The good news is that public opinion is starting to push. They are starting to feel the demands of the public, even in Republican districts. The latest Gallup poll I looked at showed that a vast majority of Americans want this to be taken out from under the politicians and an investigation to be truly independent. But you will need to push, and I'll get to that in just a minute. Jan Goroff, as the Affordable Care Act is off the burner for the moment, what shenanigans are in his, and I suppose you mean Trump's, tax bill to spread more wealth to the top? Jan, right now they are trying to decide what kind of a tax bill they want. A lot of Republicans and some people in the Trump administration have been talking about vast reform of the entire tax structure. Whenever you hear them say the word tax reform and use the word reform, watch your wallet. Because we haven't actually had a major tax reform since 1986. What they really want to do is reduce individual taxes on the top and corporate taxes. And they are already trying to plot that. The big problem they're going to have is that they've got to be deficit neutral. They can't actually raise the deficit if they want to get the bill through the Senate with a 51-vote majority. And that's called reconciliation. It's a technical term. It means you can go through the Senate. You don't have to be subject to a filibuster. In fact, it's filibuster-proof. But in order to be filibuster-proof, it cannot raise the budget deficit. And that's the trick. That's the eye of the needle that they're all trying to figure out right now, the Republicans. Zach Mayer, what the hell is going to be done about all these conflicts of interest and unconstitutional cuts and unconstitutional events that are reported more each and every day? Well, Zach, the good news is that Donald Trump's approval rating is now down to the lowest it has been in his presidency, which is lower than the lowest approval rating ever faced by Bill Clinton or by George W. Bush or by Barack Obama or by any modern president. And if Republicans in the House and the Senate see that Donald Trump is not likely to bounce up, these low approval ratings, if they contend or if they understand that they're going to stay low and might even go lower, they are going to say to themselves, Donald Trump is going to be an albatross around our necks in the 2018 midterms and in the 2020 elections. And that means that there is going to be more and more concern about Trump, which means any of the reasons that I have already given you that are legitimate grounds for impeachment will become more salient, more likely. The Republicans will say, why should we go along with this loser who's going to bring us down? Hal Hembolt. Why does a phone call to a member of Congress really make a difference? How does it work inside? Hal, it makes a huge difference. Now, one call, one time, is not going to make a huge difference, but if you continue to call, and if your friends continue to call, and others continue to call, that is registered inside. In any member of Congress's office, they have people who are tracking these phone calls, who are making lists of how many people call in and what their issue is and how they feel about the issue. And they deliver to those members of Congress, some offices once a day, some offices once a week, they deliver these tallies. These tallies make a huge difference, particularly if the person is calling who is a constituent in the district or in the state of these members of Congress. Even if you're not. it has some influence. But if you are a constituent, it doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, if you're a constituent in the district, you can have a huge impact. Jenny Fazio. Is this the time for Democrats to push for a single-payer health care plan? Jenny, I think it is. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. But right now, with the Affordable Care Act saved, but a big uncertainty hanging over its future because the Republicans, a lot of Republicans, still want to repeal it, and Donald Trump doesn't know what he's going to do, and a lot of Democrats want to hold on, but they're a little bit nervous, and as I have said, there's no reason to feel that this is going to explode. It is stabilizing, but nevertheless it can be improved. And one of the big ways of improving it, we all know, is a single-payer plan. Now is the time to at least introduce the idea. The Kaiser Foundation, which is one of the best research institutes with regard to healthcare, found that the administrative costs of Medicare, and what we're talking about essentially with a single-payer plan, is Medicare for all. The administrative costs of Medicare are only 2%. Because Medicare doesn't pay for advertising and marketing and huge executive salaries for the private sector, for profit institutions, health insurance companies. And that 2% is 1/6 the administrative costs on average of private health insurance companies. It should be Medicare for all. We are paying huge amounts of money we don't need to pay. We're paying more than any other country in the world for health insurance. 18% of our gross domestic product, and we're getting very little to show for it. We have one of the worst rates of infant mortality. We have terrible statistics with regard to the lifespans of many people actually are declining in this country. Now before I go, I want to just give you 3 specific links, because I want you to be able to go to these particular places on the web and empower yourself. Much of what we are doing with the Resistance Report is about empowering you. The first is indivisibleguide.com. That's the first one here. I've talked about this again and again. You need to. It will increase your influence. It will increase your voice hugely if you link up with an indivisible group near you. There are now over 6,000 indivisible groups around the country, more than 2 in every congressional district. If you link up with the people around you who are doing this, you will have a louder voice when it comes to calling members of Congress, when it comes to getting ready for the midterm elections of 2018. The other thing, 2 other sites I want to bring your attention to, this is swingleft.org. They will help you find purple or red congressional districts that are near you, and you can therefore travel there. You can go door to door. You can help organize, and organizing is the key, even now. It may seem like, well, the midterm elections are way off. They're not that far off. You need to organize, you need to mobilize, and you need to do it soon, so that swingleft.org will help you do so. And the other one, similar but slightly different, is sisterdistrict.com. Sisterdistrict.com links you and your people in the indivisibleguide.com, your indivisible group, or any of other people you're working with, helps link you with like-minded people in a purple state or a red state, so that you can, even at a distance, you can help them, you can support them, not just with money, but also with logistics. So these are important. A lot of what we talked about tonight is just a parade of things that the Trump administration is doing, conflicts of interest. We didn't even get to Scott Pruitt and the EPA. We could talk about a lot of things, but my point to you is that we're not going to actually make much progress until we change politics. That doesn't mean you shouldn't demonstrate. Do demonstrate. Do make a ruckus, but also be politically smart. politically active, politically strategic. That's the end of tonight's Resistance Report. We'll see you tomorrow.